All right, here we go with another fun English lesson from Mr. Lassard. This time we're going to be talking about evaluating the quality of our sources. So should we use the source that we found or should we dump it in other cases? And we need to be really careful about this. This is not something, you can't just Google something and use Joe Schmo's website. You've really got to look carefully at whether the website is usable, or the book is usable, or the magazine is usable. You can't just assume that it's good. These are required notes. Make sure that you bring the notes on the required due day so that I can see them. And we have several objectives today. So our first objective is that you'll be able to understand the elements of a quality source. You should be able to look at a source and look at these different elements and say why a source is good or bad based on those elements. You should also know how to prove a source's quality. So you should be able to tell me why a source is good or bad, similar to what I said before. And those 5 elements of a quality source are as follows. 1, authority. So the authority of a source is when the provider of the information is worth paying attention to, that they have authority over the subject. They're not just some random person in their basement making a website or writing an article about something, but they're actually an expert in the field. Second, accuracy, that the information that they're providing is correct, thorough, and accepted by other authorities. So, that may mean that you need to double check their information or triple check their information to make sure that other people agree that their information is correct. Third, objectivity, which is when the provider of the information has no secret objective behind their presentation. In other words, that they don't have some kind of bias that is making them say something that may or may not be true. So we want to look for them to be objective. Fourth, currency, that the information is up to date with current knowledge, where we are currently, so you're not using sources that are out of date. And fifth, coverage. The material honestly addresses all aspects of the topic and gives credit to those who provided additional information. So they're not leaving out a giant part of the topic. They're not taking credit for information that they didn't actually come up with. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through each of these 5 elements and just give you a few questions to ask yourself each time that you're evaluating a source for that element. And then you should be able, if you're asked about your source, to answer those questions thoroughly. Remember that using unreliable sources can ruin your research, and that it's your responsibility. So if you turn in work with unreliable source material in it, it's nobody's fault but your own, which is why you evaluate your sources first. So let's start off with how to prove authority. And in other words, that's allowing us to confirm the qualifications of the author, of the person who came up with this source. So the first thing that you need to kind of be clear on is, what is this person's education? How are they educated? Where were they educated? What degrees do they have? What qualifications do they have to actually give you information on this, on your topic? Second, what is their experience? Again, this is really similar to their education in that they need to have worked in the field and have a reason to say that they have authority in the field. Third, what is their reputation? So do they have a good reputation in the field? Because sometimes people work in the field and even have degrees in their field, but they don't have a reputation that's looked highly upon by others in the field for various different reasons. So you need to be on the lookout for that kind of thing. Make sure, once you've answered these questions, that you can prove your responses. So this sometimes just means you need to do a quick search on the author. Other times you need to look a little bit more deeply into the author to make sure that the way that they describe themselves and their education and their reputation is actually true. Second, we're going to look at how to prove accuracy. So in other words, how do you look skeptically at their information? How do you, make sure that their information is correct and not just accept it because it's from an authoritative source? So you need to ask yourself, have they provided evidence? Or, in other words, are they just giving a bunch of claims without proving their claims with evidence? If that's the case, it's not necessarily accurate information. Second, are their opinions verifiable? So when they do give an opinion, are you able to verify that their opinion is acceptable and verifiable from other sources? And third, have you double checked against other good sources? So are you finding this information in more than one place? If you're finding it in more than one place, it's more likely that it's accurate. It's not 100% accurate, but it's more likely that it's accurate. And again, you need to make sure that you can prove your responses. You can't just say, well, this information is accurate because it's accurate. You actually have to tell us how you are able to determine why the information is accurate. Third, how do you prove objectivity? In other words, how do you look for hidden motives? And you don't want to find hidden motives. If you do find hidden motives, then it's not an objective source. It's a biased source. So when you're looking for objectivity or you're looking for hidden motives, you look for things like, are they funded by individuals who might influence their information? So, if somebody's writing a paper about how good candy is for you and it's funded by the Snickers company, well, then that's probably biased information. Like, even though this is a person who did research, the fact that their funding money came from a biased source means that they are not an objective source. Second is their advertising. This is especially important on websites. There's a ton of advertising. Those are all places that are paying for that website to be up. And in that case, they may have motives for allowing or not allowing certain material on their website. It's the same in magazines, it's the same in books. If there's advertising, you need to be really careful because those advertisers can sometimes pull strings and cause them to be biased. And then third, are they trying to convince you to do something that would benefit their position? So if we go back to the M&Ms or the candy example, if they're a company that's providing research that says candy is good for you, that means they're probably trying to get you to buy more candy. In that case, put money in their pockets. And if that's the case, then they are not objective. They are biased, and you need to be careful about that. I would say don't use that information. So those are all red flags for biased or non-objective sources. Next, we're going to look at currency. So we don't want things like this picture off on the left that are out of date. You can just ignore the sound in the background there. So we're looking for how current is the information. Check their dates, in other words. So look for, have they updated their information? Websites especially should say when a site was updated last. And if it's been a few years, you probably want to be careful of it. A magazine or a book is going to tell you when it was published. And if it's a decade or two old, there's probably newer information out there. You want to look to see, are they incorporating the most recent information? Sometimes you'll come across a source that you can tell just by looking at it is out of date. And if you know just by looking at it that's out of date because you've seen more current information, you probably don't want to use that source. So make sure, again, that you can prove your responses. If you're going to say that something is current, make sure that you can prove that it's current. Last, we're going to look at coverage. So are they covering all of the deep material that they need to cover in order to be thorough? So are they complete? How do we check the material's completeness? Well, we ask ourselves a couple of things. First of all, we ask, are they missing large chunks of information that you're looking for? If you're told to look for some kind of information and a source doesn't have it, usually that means that source is not complete, because a teacher is usually not going to ask you to find information that doesn't exist. So if they're not covering all that information, they're probably not a complete source. Second, are they missing information that you've seen elsewhere? And this is related to what I was talking about on the last slide, where sometimes you'll know that something exists but this source or a particular source doesn't actually cover it. If they're missing that information, you know that that source is incomplete. And in that case, you probably want to discard that source. Lastly, you want to look for, are they citing their sources, or are they giving credit to the people from whom they took information, because they didn't necessarily get all that information on their own. They did their own research. So they need to tell you where they got that information. If they're not giving credit, that either means that they're an expert in the field and they don't need to cite their sources, or they're just somebody who took the information and didn't give credit for it. And if that's the case, you need not to use that website or that magazine or whatever it is that you're reading. And lastly, again, make sure that you can prove your responses. Make sure that you can prove, if you're going to say that it's complete, if you're going to say that things are cited, make sure that you can prove it. So those are the 5 areas that you need to look at in order to make sure that your sources are credible. If they fail in those areas, it's not a credible source. And remember that if you use a non-credible source, it's your fault. And if you lose points or if you lose a grade on that because of that, it's your fault. So be sure to be thorough with how you check for a source's credibility.